Hi, welcome to the final week of Sociology 336. Today we're going to talk about how to find a job and the changing metaphors in how we understand work. So you all are in your third or fourth year at the university. You might be wondering, what will I do afterwards? Or maybe how will I find a job in a field that I'd like to go into? Now, as you've learned in this course, we live in a society in which you and so many others cannot depend upon economic stability from a job. In a society where an increasing number of people have to constantly search for work. So you might be asking yourself, well, how do I find a job? This is stressful, especially now during the ongoing pandemic, right? So take a second to think about how you'd maybe go about finding a job. How you'd go about looking for work. What do you imagine? Maybe you're thinking about sending out resumes, crafting emails, or handing out your resume or a business card at a job fair or a career fair. Regardless of what you imagine, at some point you'll probably turn to the internet. You'll end up visiting company-specific human resources websites, or sites like LinkedIn, Monster, Glassdoor, or some other similar job-seeking website. Now, as told to us by Dr. Ilana Gershon, professor of anthropology at the University of Indiana in the US, this has not always been the case. People haven't always gone online. In fact, it's really been only in the last 20 years, basically your entire lifetime, that job seeking moved online. As Gershon tells us in the introduction to her book, Down and Out in the New Economy, the first wave of online job seeking started when you are all basically newborns. At that time, in the late 1990s or early 2000s, newspapers and their help wanted sections, they started to move online. This was quite novel. Then, after that, job listing websites appeared. The most popular of these was Monster.com. Those still exist, but alongside websites like Monster or newspaper websites, we also have social networking sites that are specifically tailored to job seeking. LinkedIn is probably the most well-known, but there are others, of course. Sometimes even Twitter or Facebook are used for job seeking. These are all places where you might find jobs, but they're also places where jobs might find you, where you're observed by potential employers, and where you can observe others. They're tools to help you find work, but they're also tools of surveillance. At the same time, there's been a dramatic change in how Western societies understand what it means to have a job, or how to define the work relationship. We've already seen this a little bit when we've read about people being encouraged to think of themselves as entrepreneurs, even though they remain subordinate to corporations. Even if corporations control our labor, those same corporations and other institutions try to convince us that we're entrepreneurs for ourselves, that we're businesses for ourselves. Think back to the beginning of this course, when we read Marx talking about the labor process. He talked about labor power as a commodity that workers sold to an employer in exchange for a wage. Now, the curious thing about labor power, of course, is that it always is part of a human, right? You can't have labor power without the person. Now, what workers are selling then in the relationship that Marx describes, or that way of understanding, what they're selling is their capacity to engage in productive activity for a given period of time. Now, according to Marx, you might recall, business owners will try to get workers to work as hard as they can during that period of time. To do so, business owners attempt to control labor in various ways that we've talked about throughout this course. Now, what the worker is doing in this sort of relationship, what Ilana Gershon calls the self as property, what the worker is doing there is renting themselves to someone or some company for a period of time. If you're a worker, you own yourself, right? It's your property. Thus, you can lease yourself or rent yourself for use by others. This is what Gershon calls the self as property metaphor for understanding what is going on when you work for someone. Your property that you own, and for a clearly delineated or clearly marked period of time, you can rent yourself out. You know when you're using yourself, and you also know when someone else is using you for their own ends. In this way of understanding work, there are clear boundaries between work life and your personal life. Now, as we've learned in the course, there has been an increase in the erosion of that boundary over the course of the last 30, 40 years. Think of the Mechanical Turk workers that we learned about a little while ago, especially the woman in the video who works from home. But also think about everyone who's working remotely. In fact, if you're interested in thinking through that and that blurring of the boundary due to remote work, I recently wrote about that, how this blurring of boundaries has been exacerbated during COVID due to the rise of remote work. I've posted a shorter magazine article that I've recently written. That's an optional reading in OnQ, and you can check that out if you want. Now, under this metaphor of the self as property, an employer is thought to have obligations to employees. The renter of property has obligations to that property's owners to not damage the property or to maintain it if damages do occur. First of all, they have to pay you, sure, if they rent you, right, under this way of understanding the work relationship. But they also have to pay for the life that you give up that gets worn out a little bit during the period that they're renting you. They do this in the form of additional benefits, often in the form of a retirement or pension, as well as additional healthcare benefits. Why is that? Well, if you're a property and you're renting yourself out, then in a capitalist society, the renter has to pay the owner the rental fee as well as any damages that they might incur, right? Now, beginning with the cultural changes noted by Boltanski and Chiapello, who we read many weeks ago, there have been drastic changes to the cultural context of work. With this comes a new metaphor for understanding the work relationship. Gershon calls this the self as business. Now, beginning with the cultural changes noted by Boltanski and Chiapello, there have been drastic changes to the cultural context of work. With this comes a new metaphor for understanding the work relationship. This is what Gershon calls the self as business. We've already seen this a bit in the readings from Boltanski and Chiapello, as well as readings from Alex Rosenblatt and Sarah Kessler. Workers are now told that they're entrepreneurs of their own business, a business of their self. In this metaphor, you're told that you provide services to others. It's not that you rent yourself out as property so much as you provide a service. Now, businesses are commonly thought to not rent themselves out for others' use, but to be paid to provide whatever services the business performs. You can think about this in daily interactions, like when you go and buy a pita sandwich at a pita pit. You're not renting the sandwich shop, you're paying them to make you a sandwich for the service of sandwich making, right? This is similar to the context in which you are asked to understand yourself as a worker in the 21st century. Businesses don't rent themselves to other businesses so much as they engage in partnerships with other businesses. Each temporary partnership aids in building reputation or the brands of each business. You're being asked to think of yourself this way these days. This is what Gershon is saying. So if businesses had obligations to employees under the self as property metaphor, then what obligations do business owners have to employees under the self as business metaphor? We've already seen the answer to this when we examine Uber and other platforms. The answer is that they have minimal obligations to their employees. Now, these changing metaphors for work also impact how we search for jobs or how we talk about ourselves when we're trying to sell ourselves to employers. Rather than presenting a record of everything we've done in terms of tasks, what tasks we've performed, we present a record of business accomplishments. And we present ourselves as a tailored set of skills. We're often told to use active verbs, as in, I increased sales by 70%, or I developed new strategies to maintain efficiency. Think about the resumes you write or have written. You probably have been told to do this thing. You might even just do it on your own because it's quite widespread advice. We're advised to present ourselves not as people, but as consistent bundles of skills that may and always do improve other businesses. We're told to present ourselves as consistent bundles of services that we can provide. Now, if everyone is just a bundle of skills, a bundle of services that they might provide, and if everyone has the same skills, well, then how do you stand out? In other words, if everyone is interchangeable, or at least if everyone is thought of as being interchangeable by employers, then how do you stand out? Well, job-seeking gurus tell us that we should make a thing of ourselves, just as if we were toothpaste or laundry detergent. In other words, we're told to think of ourselves as a brand. After all, what are brands but bundles of associations? That's what we're told to do when we're told to self-brand. We're told to reduce ourselves to a few key terms: shiny, brave, smiley, to maintain consistent presentation across all social media websites, and to maintain consistency of that presentation offline as well. We're told to always be on as we design our websites, hand out business cards, and network our way to a successful career. I'm sure many of you are probably quite comfortable with this language of self-branding. You probably use it quite often. But I, for one, will never be comfortable making a thing of myself. I'm a multifaceted, complicated human being. I'm not a neatly packaged brand, and neither are you. This critical angle is also where Gershon is coming from. Rather than the clear division between private self and work self, as under the self as property metaphor, the self as business metaphor subsumes ourselves under the logic of capitalism, forcing us to think ourselves as things, as brands, in all aspects of our life. In fact, the language of branding comes from mass manufacturing and mass consumption, in which undifferentiated mass-manufactured products required branding to stand out in the marketplace. We're told now that we must do the same in order to find a job. The implication being that we're all just the same. Now, that might very well help you in the job market, engaging in these tactics, but as sociologists, I think we need to ask, what does that do to us? What's that do to the way that we interact with each other, the way that we care for one another, the way that we show love for each other, the way that we show up for each other in our interactions? What does that way of thinking about ourselves do to the work relationship, do to our relationship with ourselves, to our life prospects, to our futures? But in more practical terms, does any of this even matter when you're looking for a job? Well, using social media opens us up to surveillance from bosses, coworkers, and others, which might impact how we express ourselves online as well as in the flesh. Also, most job recruiters do use LinkedIn and other social media websites alongside Google to observe and examine job candidates. Sometimes they even request your social media account names when you're applying for a job. If your accounts are private, they might ask for access, or they might view your private setting as a red flag. At the very least, they'll look at your main photo, and even if they don't say so, they're making a judgment. For this reason, you're advised to craft a persona online and to make sure that this online persona fits your chosen brand identity. Smiley, brave, strong. In face-to-face interactions, this is already quite complicated. How should I dress? How should I talk? Should I flex my vocabulary and use big words? Should I be formal? Should I affect some sort of accent that I don't normally use, or some sort of manner of speaking that I don't normally have? For example, oftentimes students and colleagues of mine at Queen's treat me quite oddly because of my American accent. I've had students interrupt me mid-sentence to exclaim, "You're American?" It's quite bizarre, and honestly, it's quite rude. But I often wonder, should I adopt some sort of fake Ontario accent? That seems kind of wrong, and I'm not so sure I could pull it off, which makes me wonder, maybe I should just troll people and just go full-on Yosemite Sam.
It's Yosemite Sam! Yosemite Sam! Yosemite. Yeah, Yosemite Sam! The roughest, toughest He-Man, stuffest hombre has ever crossed the Rio Grande. And I ain't no mamby-pamby. Now all of you skunks, clear out of here!
This is already quite complicated enough, right? Managing the presentation of self. It's already quite complicated enough in situations when you're interacting with someone face to face. And that's a situation in which you can freely discuss things in real time and negotiate through interaction a shared meaning of the situation. Online interactions further complicate this. Why is that? Well, we need to navigate not just the dynamics of interpersonal interaction, but we also need to navigate multiple modes of communication, from photographs to video to text communication, as in posts. And we also need to account for multiple possible unintended interpretations of all of those things. Again, this is hard enough to do in a face-to-face interaction. It's also hard enough for professional advertisers to manage images, text communications, audio, and all that sort of thing when they're engaging in branding practices. It's hard enough for professionals to do it. So how are normal people expected to do it? It's actually quite hard. And quite a skill unto itself. So if you're good at it, you should feel good about yourself, but you should also be critical and say, further complicating this already difficult act of self-branding online, each platform has a unique structure of participation, each with a distinctive configured user built into the design of the platform. Think about how you participate on Instagram versus Facebook, versus Snapchat, versus TikTok, versus Twitter. Each allows for different actions, and alongside those actions, alongside those design features, there are different cultures of interaction that have arisen on each platform. The same goes for these job search websites. I think this highlights two important things about work in technology. First, many of the problems associated with workplace technologies and the organization of work may also be found in the labor market when you're looking for a job. Technologies are designed for particular users, thus increasing the chances of inequality being built into the technology used to find work. Second, the so-called digital divide. When we talk about that, we often focus on access and giving people access to digital technologies. But this digital divide may not just be about access to digital technologies or access to the internet. Even with access, there are still fluencies required to use these technologies to accomplish certain tasks. fluencies such as speech patterns, manners of dress and style, as well as visual composition in photographs and textual composition when you're writing social media posts. Now, as any good sociologist knows, these forms of cultural knowledge used to do these various things present a photo that will come across in a desired way, to write something that is intelligible to a wide variety of people in a way that you intend. These are forms of cultural knowledge that require what Bourdieu called cultural capital. And cultural capital, as any good sociologist knows, tends to be classed, tends to be gendered, tends to be racialized. Thus, even with access to digital technologies, conventional sources of inequality persist in the labor market. Okay, so this lecture concludes the course. What have we learned, you might ask? Well, quite a lot, I think. Overall, I think you should now understand how technology and work have always been intertwined. Even if we think of ourselves to be in this unique moment where we're so technological, many of you say this in your posts, even if we think of ourselves as unique in our technological dependency, work and technology have always been intertwined. Today, we certainly face unique situations that differ in many ways from the state of work even a decade ago. But work has always required technology, and technology always requires workers to produce and operate it. We've come to learn a variety of techniques used by capitalists or business owners to exert power or control over labor, and to sow division among the working classes and the middle class. We've learned how technology does, at times, play a role in those techniques of control, but we've also learned that technology can, at some times, help workers. At other times, technology appears quite ambivalent, neither wholly a tool of capitalist power, nor empowering workers fully. And I think these 2 points have been quite challenging for some of you, so I hope you walk away with more to think about than you had before. Now, between the readings and the lectures of this course, you now have tools with which you can think critically about the relationship between work and technology, especially in terms of class, but also in terms of gender and race. From there, you can form your own opinion about the world of work that you already inhabit or the one that you're about to enter. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the class. It's been my pleasure to have you all as students, and I wish you all the best during this very stressful time. Take care, and good luck in all your final exams.